Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George, joined once more by Tate for another spoiler discussion. And this is for the brand new release, of course, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, directed by James Mangold, starring Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones for the, well, technically sixth time, but the final time nonetheless, if we're going with the Young Indiana Jones TV series cameo. But first of all, Tate, how are you doing today?
Yeah, doing okay. It's weird that I think we'll go into this when we're talking about it. I know this is a spoilers discussion, but just general thoughts over Indiana Jones in general. It's weird that we're reviewing an Indiana Jones film, and it's not even the biggest, or even possibly even top three biggest film that's coming out in the next month. That's unusual. It's competing with a lot of other films, and I guess we'll talk about it as we go through and talk about box office, but I feel like a lot of people forgot this film was coming out. I feel like this film maybe wasn't advertised as well as it was. But I guess I'll go into that when we get into the actual review.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting talking, and I think with this, I mean, we know the opening weekend box office numbers are out. We know it's July the 4th in America on Tuesday, so it's going to get a big boom there. But yeah, June has been one of the weirdest months in box office history. Everything performed below expectations, including Spider-Verse, all the others. A lot of big films, one big film a week. Heading into next week, where we get Mission Impossible on Monday the 10th, Barbie Oppenheimer on the 21st, and then the deadest August in years. So it's going to be interesting following numbers projections. And this one, I think next week's going to have the very big second week. Is it going to be the drop? Is it going to retain? We'll find out in a week's time. But as always, we're going to hear from people watching at home. This is a spoiler discussion. The film is out, so please do comment your thoughts on the film. We want to know what you thought of it, what you liked, what you didn't like. Want to get involved with us. We're going to do this as the old school spoiler discussions. We're going to go through the big moments from the film. We've got a schedule of sorts, and we're going to hope that covers everything that needs to be covered. And in line with that, anything we miss, we'll bring up at the end as well. Obviously, there'll be some behind-the-scenes stuff as well, and a load of other things. So please do get involved. And if you don't already subscribe, please do. We've got a lot of other things coming on the way. No more Indiana Jones stuff, but there is a playlist where it has all of our Indiana Jones reviews on the channel. As obviously we did the Spielberg retrospective last year, where obviously the first four films he directed them, and they were all covered on that series. So you can check that out and go get us on our social medias. At the moment, Twitter is still existing, but Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, Facebook labels.com/cinema_savvy, link to Redbubble in the description below. That intro might change soon. I've set up I've got Linktree because I've realized I've got on my personal, but not on here, which would save a lot of time. But obviously, someone's forgot to pay their Google bill, and now Twitter hasn't worked. And one night of Twitter not working has basically wiped out advertising, football transfers, and everything else. So that's going to change. But we're on a lot of other social media platforms for those curious. But Tate, heading back over to you.
Yes.
I want to know your thoughts heading into this. Maybe I say heading into this, not just like you watching yesterday. If you can even remember the announcement a long time ago, I want to say 2015. It took them a few years after Disney bought Lucasfilm to get the Indiana Jones rights from Paramount, but this film has been in production for a very, very long time. So almost to the point of it's finally come out, and it's a film people thought would never make it, I guess, out.
Yeah, when we went through the Spielberg retrospective, I think I voiced my opinion on Indiana Jones quite a lot. I love Indiana Jones. I love the original trilogy. Less so with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. We've had multiple chunks taken out of that film on the channel already. But I'll be perfectly honest. Well, I knew this film was coming out, and I didn't have any hype for it at all, which is unusual because I love this franchise and I love the character and I love Harrison Ford as an actor. So to not have as much, hype going into a film like this is kind of crazy. And maybe Crystal Skull had an effect on me with that. Maybe it's just the fact that this year is stacked with films that this wasn't the top of my priority list, and therefore it slid down. But yeah, going into it, I had zero expectations, and maybe that was a good thing. Maybe kind of the kind of aftertaste of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull still lingering made me think, well, it can't be any worse, can it? They can't ruin the franchise or destroy the franchise that I love any worse, or make me dislike it in any way more than I did with that film. So I had zero expectations and not really much hype going into it. But I want to say it was really unusual experience going to see it in the cinema, because going in, I walked into the cinema. When I went to go book it, there was no bookings at the time, so I thought, okay, empty cinema, maybe not many people going to see it. When I actually ended up going into the cinema screen, it was packed. It was full, which was crazy to think about, especially looking at the kind of the box office numbers and how well it's done on its opening weekend. It was really, really, really busy, and I think I was probably the second or third youngest person there. There was some kids who came in a little bit later with their parents, but apart from that, like the entire screening was filled with people who are older than me. I'd say anywhere from the age of 30 up to the age of 70, 80. So people who have probably grown up with the franchise, people who have kind of revisited the franchise over the years. And I guess it shows that this film still has a big following, and maybe the advertising did work in the UK. People have actually shown up to this film on its opening weekend. But yeah, really, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I can't talk about mine too much. So I've got a friend that works at ILM. I won't name her, and I got given a +1 for the crew screening, so I got to watch it last Saturday at the BFI IMAX. Obviously, you don't really get invited to crew screenings. They're not a big thing people know about, but they are usually the best because people don't get their phones out and they are there to watch the film that they worked on. So there's always that sense of respect whilst watching it. And that saved me the effort of having to try and do press. I know a lot of people there. Charlie Ashby, friend of the channel Imperial Senate podcast, he did the premiere as well. Liv as well, and friends did the premiere both UK and US. And Luke's one, we're looking out for a lot of the other people that we know, the fans, as they do at these big events. And it was really interesting this because obviously I never saw Crystal Skull at the cinema. I didn't see it till the first time, so a few years ago. I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as people have made out for 15 years. I've seen so much worse, and it's insane. The reaction to that film.
Dare I say, I think, speaking from a person who isn't the biggest fan of the film, I understand the bad reactions, but I do understand when reactions go too far. You can critique the film.
I just mean it's the first film. If you look at all these legacy sequels was that the first big legacy sequel?
I guess Star Wars
prequels, but same thing. And there's the generation that grew up with them have now grown up, and they didn't take to it, and they took to it in the Indiana Jones more. I mean, the prequels. I mean, I can't really say they didn't take on the prequels. They did. George Lucas admits he sold the franchise because of people giving him abuse, and that's why he wouldn't make more films, because of those people who now are desperate for him to come back, who say they never didn't abuse. And Indiana Jones had the exact same issue. I'll be honest. From everything I've read, everything I've seen, behind the scenes videos, everything, I don't think Spielberg's heart was ever in doing the fourth Indiana Jones film. I think that was very much George Lucas finished the Star Wars prequel, said, guess what? We're going to do Indiana Jones again. And obviously, Harrison Ford loves the character of Indiana Jones. It is his favorite character of all those he's played. So, even Crystal Skull, again, I know I didn't see it, but it was a humongous hit at the time. Its critics were very well received at the time. Audience scores were very well received at the time. So it's always interesting to me to see the reactions, obviously, of those that hate it. And again, I get it. I know also a lot of people similar to our age that do like Crystal Skull. And it is very much that, not generational in the sense the prequels are, but there will be a group of people, I guess, that maybe had their introduction to Indiana Jones through Crystal Skull back in 2008. And certainly that audience, I think, are a lot fonder of it. So it's really interesting for me to see an Indiana Jones film at the cinema for the first time. My initial thoughts, I really enjoyed it, watching it at the cinema. In terms of heading into it hype, I'd say I was a bit deflated after Cannes. However, I was also in that mindset of, I think I questioned it from the get-go. Why is Indiana Jones premiering 6 weeks early at Cannes? When they have had big blockbusters in the past, the three that jump to my mind are Mad Max Fury Road, Solo, and Top Gun Maverick. All of those were within a week of their normal cinema release. So it's just like an additional premiere for them to have. While premiering it at Cannes, having all this hype and a very lukewarm reception, it's Rotten Tomatoes sat at 50%. Just a reminder for people, Rotten Tomatoes is an aggregator, because that always seems to be missed these days when you look at stuff online. And I just want to have a go at the spoiler-free review for quoting the Rotten Tomatoes, like I was being paid by Disney to talk about it. And obviously that's now jumped up to, I think, 68%, 67%, which is unnatural. Again, you don't normally see films go up or down. It normally sits at roughly wherever it was when the reviews first service. So that was an indicator to me that, okay, I mean, my expectation for the film was just be better than Crystal Skull, but I'm not expecting it to be anywhere near as good as the first three. I know Tom Butler, a friend of the channel, he'd messaged me, say he'd seen it early. He got into Harrison Ford and he really enjoyed it. And I'm very much in the same mindset of him with the approach to this film. So I had a really good time watching it. It was 2.5 hours. And my question to you immediately is, did you feel that runtime? Because I'm lucky, right? We had no trailers. We went straight into a film. I didn't feel the runtime, and I thought I would. And it's something I'm noticing more and more now in cinema releases. But that's something I'm very curious at. Just with you for this, I guess, as well.
Well, I agree. Over the years, as I've started to become a bit more analytical with films, and I can watch them for enjoyment, but at the same time, I've got to be thinking, well, why am I enjoying this? Kind of what elements do I like? How is the music to this film? Instead of viewing it from a sole kind of like, oh, this is fun, I'm enjoying it. I've got to actually have an opinion at the end of it. And one of the big things I've noticed over the years is that runtime does kind of not just runtime, but the pacing of the film really affects the viewing experience. And I think I didn't feel any kind of problems with the pacing of this film. Like, I didn't feel the urge to look at my watch. I didn't feel the urge to go, wow, this sequence is taking long or anything like that. For me, it just kind of flowed like a normal film would. It didn't feel like it was a plus 2 hours film. In fact, it got to the end and I was like, oh, okay, wow, okay, yeah, that's about the runtime that I had in my head. Kind of like that's the story, completed to where I expected it to be. I wasn't expecting anything more. I wasn't expecting anything less. It kind of sealed itself up really nicely as far as the story was concerned. By the time the credits hit.
That's fair. And that's going to be a good segue into another big talking point, is the prologue. So we're going to really get into it now. But when this started filming, this was shooting I want to say near Newcastle, because I remember there was a lot of talk that this just started shooting in the UK. Harrison Ford kept getting spotted in and around Newcastle on his bike, and there's obviously a castle there which they shot the opening prologue at. And the de-aging has been a massive talking point recently. And I know that de-aging is always a big talking point, I guess. My question to you as well, so for me at least, I thought it looked really good. I'm not saying that because I was at the ILM screening. This is like the I think the second biggest cinema in the country after Manchester Printworks, or the biggest in the country, unless it's IMAX or some weird asterisk next to the Printworks. I was dreading seeing the de-aging, only because I was at such a big cinema. I thought this is going to look horrendous. Even if it looks good on a smaller screen, it will be stretched and blown up here. I thought it looked really good. Now, interestingly, when I spoke to a lot of people after watching it, some have thought it's really good, some don't like it, some just still say it's uncanny valley, which I really understand. I think it's de-aging as a concept is something I don't think there'll ever be, doesn't matter what you do, there will never be 100% of an audience to do that. Even Harrison Ford, by the way, in a previous film, rather than de-aged, they cast an impersonator as him. I forgot the name of the film. It was Anthony Gruber was the impersonator who people were trying to get to being Solo because of it. Obviously, Lucasfilm themselves have gone the route of a younger Harrison Ford. They cast old Ehrenreich as Solo, who I think is massively underrated in that film, proving the point to the general audience who didn't turn up. He's not Harrison Ford. So we do get Harrison Ford de-aged for the opening prologue set in 1944, setting up the events of the film, also with de-aged Mads Mikkelsen, which people aren't talking about enough as well. I want to know your thoughts on the de-aging before we go into that opening, because for me, I thought it looked good. I know it's all over the trailers, and it looks a lot better on a cinema screen than it does online. There's a whole load of variables for me saying that. But again, de-aging something I don't think it'll ever get 300% nailed down. I don't think there's so many variables taken into account. You've got to think of the actors, the ages, how far back they're de-aging them, etc., etc., etc. So I want to know your thoughts on that for the opening, because it's a long prologue as well. It's not like the 5-10 minute opening. It's about 25 minutes, I think.
Yeah. The de-aging I'm stuck in the middle with, because I do agree with kind of the whole, wow, we've come really, really far with being able to de-age people and make them look good on screen and stuff like that. And it does look like Harrison Ford did at the time. So you can kind of immediately go, oh yeah, that's really well done. And you can congratulate the team on that. But you can still recognize that it is de-aged. And as I know there's going to be a point where we get to kind of the de-aging process where we cannot tell. And when we finally get to that point, that's when we'll know, okay, we've hit the jackpot here. So I'm stuck in the middle with it. One thing I will say though is I wasn't able to tell even slightly with Mads Mikkelsen's de-aging.
Really? See,
No.
I thought his was not more obvious because obviously,
maybe
the
this
thing
is
with
because
Mad-
all I'm thinking of is back to kind of, Casino Royale, kind of, like
yeah, the reference. I mean, it goes from 1944 to 69. So that's 25 years. Now, the irony I've thought of this is that Indiana Jones in this film, talking about 69, actually, I think his birthday is like 1899 or something like that. So he's actually like 10 years younger, or just over 10 years younger than Harrison Ford actually is. Whereas Mads, it isn't known. But I thought it's the smoothing of the skin. And I don't think Mads looks old at all. It's more noticeable de-aging someone who I wouldn't say is old. And then you obviously get Thomas Kretschmann, who isn't de-aged, who just is always playing Germans and Nazis in every film. He's always great when he does it, but I wish he could get a little bit better service.
I just want to say one of the things, as soon as I saw when they originally cast Toby Jones into the film, I immediately thought, okay, so he's playing a Nazi then. Like, straight away, there was no question behind it. But the fact that he isn't a Nazi, he's actually just incredibly British in this film was a nice surprise. And I knew that from the trailers that he was a good guy and stuff like that. But just that point on that part of the opening. The one thing, though, that did almost take me out of it was that Harrison Ford's kind of speech and cadence is definitely the older version of Harrison Ford with the younger version of the body on top. And that, I feel, could have been fixed. That's one thing that did immediately make me go, okay, it's Harrison Ford still doing the lines, but he's old Harrison Ford now. He's doing the lines as if he was young Harrison Ford. It needs to be a bit kind of sharper and stuff like that. It just felt a little bit off in that sense.
No, I'm with you. And I think a really interesting comparison is Mark Hamill in the Mandalorian universe, because obviously, again, raising questions. This is far more, I think, up for discussion. The use of AI, far more against that than I am de-aging. You got Harrison Ford under that de-aging stuff. And yeah, the voice, it sounds like the older Harrison Ford. And I will say, just not judging the sequence, but sticking to the CGI stuff, the only bit I felt really weirded by was when they have, for some reason, the CGI of him running on top of the train. The legs looked like Slender Man, and that's the first time where I did think, I was like, okay, this is too noticeable now. I know it's darkness, and to the credit of the de-aging team, having the whole sequence set at night, makes it a lot easier for the visual effects artists, for the lighting, for everything else. It was clearly shot in daytime, as everyone knew, when it was shooting around here. Well, I say around here in the UK. But it is one of them where I think long term, the decisions they've made up to that point have probably benefited it. And again, I think they're taking that technology into account, because there's nothing worse than, not just for a big blockbuster film, but for any film as a whole, doing a big set piece and having atrocious. I mean, our Fallout review comes out on Tuesday. Mission Impossible. We spoke about Justice League, the Henry Cavill mustache gate. All of that was wrong. Whereas this doesn't feel inherently wrong, but just the running CGI, sometimes I don't understand fully.
I will make a point onto this as well. So in King of the Crystal Skull, one of the big kind of positives for me was the opening sequence felt like it was a practical sequence, apart from the whole, nuking of the fridge.
Not the CGI beaver?
The CGI beaver nuking the fridge, get rid of all of that. Everything else in that sequence was practical. It was made to feel like the old Indiana Jones films. Yeah. And I know that kind of over time, you're going to be bringing in more and more more and more kind of visual effects, like CGI and stuff like that. I do fear that this opening sequence did feel a little bit video gamey, with kind of the CGI of the train and everything like that. The action being over the top, but not like old school practical over the top, more like new school CGI'd over the top. On top of that, you've got the de-aging on top of that. It just feels like it felt a little bit video gaming. That's the only kind of critique I can give it for that sequence, because I actually really enjoyed the opening sequence.
I'm the same. And one thing I'll give the opening for, when they start talking about I don't want to say Jesus, now that's going to offend someone somewhere. They're going for a historical religious artifact, right? And if you look at the essence, okay, maybe not Temple of Doom with that, but where for me, I don't associate with Crystal Skull, right? I lose myself with it, unfortunately, was the story of not just aliens, but I love the history side of Indiana Jones. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people probably say that. We'd all heard of, maybe through Monty Python, we'd all heard of the Holy Grail. I don't know. But it was one of those things where you could at least have this real life history side of thing going in line of it, which I will say is an overall for this film, it really delivers with once you get later on with the dial stuff. But the opening, it just immediately put you back into the spot of it's Indiana Jones. Yes, he's punching Nazis, he's fighting Nazis. We know that's his thing. He does it better than no one else. But also again, Hitler's after that religious stuff, and we knew Hitler was like that. The older films have done that, and I liked that it was that point in the war where the tides had clearly turned. People knew what was going to do. The history person in me was kind of enjoying that really cool opening set piece, and I think that's what Crystal Skull missed. And I think I was in from the get go once that stuff started coming out. That again, the Crystal Skull stuff, because the Crystal Skull it's the opening scene that it's what you mentioned earlier. It's the product they're going for. They know it is this weird thing, and I don't criticize the film for it because contextually, it's hey, we're doing a new Indiana Jones film. It's going to be in the 1950s. It's going to be in the Cold War. What else? Contextually would have people spoke of, and it would have. I mean, Asteroid City's just come out, but it would have had those Area 51 type of things. Extraterrestrials. Could it happen? Could it be real? So I understand why they did that for that last film. I really understand why they did it. For me, it didn't work. And I know a lot of other people obviously will say that too. But I like the fact it was going back to the roots of, this is what we've done in those earlier films and setting it up for the dial, I think worked quite well. And I actually really loved the concept that Mads' character, Volo, the scientist, knew they'd lost. They'd made mistakes. And he's trying to right the wrongs of the metaphorical wrongs of a Nazi believer. His knowledge in the dial. No, this is what I can save. This is what I know we could win the war with. I know that sets up the overall story, but I'm hooked. I'm hooked from that get go. I'm invested in not the villain's character. I don't know how you say it properly because it sounds like a Nazi sympathizer. But I don't know. It just. What did you feel with that sort of history stuff? Because it did feel like Indiana Jones, didn't it?
It immediately draws you into the film because it's an artifact that you can immediately put context into, and the Indiana Jones films have always been rooted in areas of religion, whether that is the voodooism they experience in Temple of Doom, or whether it's the Christianity they experience in both Raiders and in Crusade. So going back to those kind of roots of him being a proper archaeologist and not just being interested in kind of one artifact, but multiple different artifacts. Like in Raiders, he's not just after, the Ark of the Covenant, he's after the idol at the very start. So you're immediately kind of, there are multiple different things that he's going to be after because he's always looking to collect or he's always looking to store in the museum. So the fact that you can immediately have the context of, okay, here's a big historical artifact, and that's going to be the main kind of point of this opening sequence. And then we get this one small kind of line coming in about Archimedes' dial that, they end up kind of taking, midway through kind of the opening chase, and then they kind of, that sets up the rest of the film. It puts you in the context of Indiana Jones back to his old kind of shenanigans. It puts you into kind of the spirit of the film and what it's going to be about, and it introduces kind of the main MacGuffin for the film all in one kind of sequence. So it's really well crafted in that sense.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. I've just got a quick comment by Martin. 300 mil budget. I don't think it looked like a film that kind of budget. No, I'm with you 100%. What's very interesting about COVID, and I'd actually argue Mission Impossible is going to have this. Mission Impossible's budget is 290 mil that's coming out next week. Now, yes, it's got practical effects and stunts, but a lot of the films that shot throughout COVID, not just had delays, shot throughout, budgets blew up from productions being put on pause, from delays, injuries. In this film's case, there was so much that happened, production issues. It was meant to shoot pre-COVID. This film would have had a massive budget before filming ever started. And that's just from writers, directors coming, going, studio space, booking it, delaying it, not being there, COVID. Harrison Ford had injuries, of course, as well, which had to alter schedules and delay it again. So a lot of these films where you see these insane numbers that are the correct budgets and they never look like it. And this one is $300 million. It's probably in the top 10, 15 of all time. I think the most expensive film in history, I think they said Avatar: Way of Water now. It's not official yet, but you can see it in there. And I believe that they say that Avengers Endgame Infinity Ward cost 500 mil a piece, which, at least they made their money back and more, didn't they? So this is 300 more budget, and that's not including marketing. So you're looking at 600 mils break even, which I don't think is going to have at all in the slightest. But yeah, the opening, I mean, as a set piece goes, I'm down for it. I enjoyed it. Some parts felt a bit long, but I think for me, it worked as a whole. I know some people, again, I think it comes down to the de-aging, right? If that's working for you, that opening sequence is going to work. If the de-aging doesn't work for you, it's not going to work. And I think that's also the same for the end of the film when we get to that big talking point, because I think that's the caveat that loses people or doesn't.
Yes.
But sticking with that, let's fast forward to 1969. Indiana Jones waking up alone, topless, on Moon Day, they called it.
Yeah.
Now, we haven't written this in the schedule because we're doing it by story, but I guess when the opening shot of his apartment is panning and we get to see Sean Connery and Shia LaBeouf cameo, both photos as Mutt and Senior. Do we have the Shia LaBeouf conversation now very quickly? Because it does set the tone of the film. I know they do the reveal in Greece. So, I mean, we haven't spoke about this, have we? We're fresh with each other for our thoughts. We all knew Shia LaBeouf wasn't going to be in this film. And I know that one of the raging criticisms of Crystal Skull, again, I saw it for the first time a few years ago, a lot of people hated Mutt in the film. Now, I don't think he was atrocious as a character. I think a lot of the aggro I'd seen online was the fact he goes for the hat at the end, and we all very much know that, had there been future films, that would have probably been the plan. Obviously, Mutt's not in this film. Shia LaBeouf, well, Mutt's dead. It's a spoiler discussion. We can say that. Sorry if you didn't watch it in time. Killed off screen. Contextually in Vietnam, which I think worked very well for when we get to it. And what I want to say, I don't know if you knew this or others at home. So obviously, Shia is not in this, but this isn't like a recent thing. They didn't write a script of Mutt and be like, because one thing I've seen online, which I'm struggling to, the insanity of just not replying to people, is this. Oh, they've replaced Mutt with Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Mutt was never in this film. Even when Spielberg was directing, when David Kirk was writing, he was not in this film. You're looking at the mid-10s then. Obviously, Shia would have had some issues still back then, but the core issue was that he had already fallen out with Spielberg. He'd fallen out with Harrison Ford. Obviously, he wasn't in Transformers films after the third one. So there was obviously issues he's had. And I'm just going to say this, and I don't mean to sound terrible. I think in the mid-10s, you can look at the Shia stuff and think, we hope he gets better, as I did. I grew up watching Even Stevens. I love the Transformer films. And obviously, where we sit here in the year 2023, he's got a big court case for sexual assault. He's been murdering stray dogs, all this sorts of aggro. And the only thing I sort of have to say on all of that, this film did well to reference it, but to put the Indiana Jones and Marion character arcs around it, I think that worked for me. And I think that's all they could really do. Their hands were tied before the film began. Then it raises the question about what was the point, which is also a question many other people have about why is there a fifth Indiana Jones film. But for me, at least, they dodged an Ezra Miller-sized bullet for marketing. That's 100%. All I'm going to say. The equal comparison, Warner Brothers could have made a big decision a year, 2 years ago. They didn't. And look at what's happened since. With
you
how
have Grant Gustin right there, ready to go.
It's the interesting thing, isn't it? The Mutt stuff. Just for the story wise, I like that. Again,
they never mention it by name, do they? They never in the film. It's always my son. And I noticed that. I noted that immediately. I was like, okay, they're not even going to mention him by name.
Broadcast says his son dies. Yeah. Well, his son was lost a year ago, don't they? They say that too. In
avoid the entire situation, but also make it an integral part of the characters. The reason why Indy and Marion have kind of driven themselves away from each other and stuff like that. So I'm completely okay with it. I think that's a very smart kind of way of dealing with it, whilst referencing the film's previous and respecting your history, which is what this entire series has always been about. But also having to deal with that situation and distancing themselves from the actor. Smart move. And even if he was kind of involved in the script at any point at all, you wouldn't want him there by the end of it. You wouldn't want him there by the time the film came out. And I feel like it would have given a similar kind of tarnishing to the story. And I'm glad you actually mentioned Phoebe Waller-Bridge, because I'll be perfectly honest. If they were planning on, the previous film having Mutt try and take up the mantle, and there were people saying, "Oh, well, Phoebe Waller-Bridge was written to take up the mantle from this film," I feel like they actually did a pretty good job. I would watch the shit out of a Phoebe Waller-Bridge Indiana Jones film. Like, I feel like her character was full of fun, kind of like had the great one-liners, full of adventure as well. She's a smart character, and I would happily watch more adventures with her involved. I know they're probably going to put the Indiana Jones name to rest for now.
Yeah.
But I feel like maybe if the roles had swapped and if she was involved in the previous film, and maybe even if they wrote it in as Indy having a daughter, that would have worked. That would have been fine, especially if she was involved in the writing team. But I know that that's just kind of, a pipe dream, and we have to deal with the situation we dealt with. And as far as characters are concerned, she was actually my favorite from the film.
Interesting. So I liked her in it. I've not seen Fleabag, which I know is her most
Fleabag's
show. Yeah, and I know that she writes that. We know that, of course, she didn't. Did she get credited for Bond for the final rewrite of No Time to Die?
I think so.
And it's interesting when she was cast in this, because obviously, again, Lucasfilm-wise, she'd also been involved on Solo. She was the droid in that. And it was interesting. So when this film was maybe a year or two ago, that rumor popped up that there was Disney wanted to do a live-action Indiana Jones series for Disney Plus. Obviously, it wouldn't be starring Harrison Ford, but it's set in the Indiana Jones world. Every single person assumed on the get-go Phoebe Waller-Bridge's TV series. I like her in this film, but I didn't get those vibes that you did, that I could see her do her own thing. I literally felt like she had a character arc, and they delivered with it. There wasn't any linger the hat on her at the end like they did in the last film or anything like that. It felt very not traditional. Indiana Jones has always had a female sort of, not protagonist, but like a companion, right? In the same way like Bond has a Bond girl. And in kind of like Anna Diarmas, no, it's a really weird comparison. This is the one they're clearly not going to be getting with, because obviously it's his goddaughter. And again, they're trying to, whether you want to say four wraps them in the corner, they can't suddenly say he's got a daughter now. I also completely understand that as well, because Mutt was the surprise son. You couldn't have also had a surprise daughter too.
Yeah, no, that'd be ridiculous.
Exactly. And I liked her in this. Now, since Bob Chapek has left Disney, it was very quickly news stories that there will not be an Indiana Jones live-action TV series at Lucasfilm. So, and obviously, anyone's been following the Disney Plus acquisitions and whatnot, that stuff is getting shut down. A lot of Disney Plus projects are getting shut down. A lot of it was Bob Chapek greenlighting stuff to have more stuff on streaming when they're losing so much money off it. So I'm not surprised they're going to put it all away. I think, I don't want to tempt fate. I think had this have been made a year later, I still think we'd have Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I also think we'd have Kei Kwan reprising the role of Short Round.
Oh, 100%.
And I also think that they would be talking about a Short Round TV series. Now, I wouldn't want that. I love him. But I think the Indiana Jones franchise sort of begins and ends with Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford. I know that they did the Young Indiana Jones show in the 90s, which was meant to be quite good. But one thing I saw on Star Wars Explained, which was a much better pitch, was if they were to ever continue Indiana Jones, an animated series using all the unused concepts, story from Lucas, from Spielberg back in the day. There's tons and tons of story concepts that were never used. That would work great. We know that there's a game in development, which could work. So I think for me, I'm done with live action Indiana Jones. I think Indiana Jones shouldn't function past live action anymore. But I do wonder that there are stories to tell down the line. I'm curious about other mediums to do so, and I wouldn't be opposed to it.
It's a bit of a kind of odd state to be in, because there is another changeover at the head of Disney, and therefore kind of the plans are changing all the time. This film does a good enough job to kind of not set up, but just kind of lay to rest the franchise. It's a good end to the franchise. It's a good way to close the book, shall we say. But there are some characters that they could use, whether they want to use them for video games or whether they want to use them for books or for animated series or serials or whatever they want to do if they wanted to continue the franchise. And the issue with franchises nowadays is no franchise can stay lay to rest properly, can they? There's no way that a franchise is going to go, no, we are done. We're not going to do anything again, and you'll never hear from it again. It's just going to be revived or kind of brought back, or we're going to get, a recasting into it or anything like that. We're going to get something coming back in at some stage. So that's impossible to kind of put it that way. But there are kind of franchises and various different things that could rival it. I know that the Uncharted games did a very good job of kind of putting that into
They
a video
are
game
Indiana
format,
Jones.
but maybe the film didn't do a good enough job in the same sense. There is a definite gap in the market if people want to go and watch these kind of films, to go and watch adventure films where, you know, people go off and explore history. I mean, Da Vinci Code series is one that kind of springs to mind in a more kind of didn't quite work sense. I mean, the first two films were well received. The third film was less so. I think people forgot there was a third film even. But
I'm sorry to jump in. What I will say,
yeah.
so I was on a walk yesterday and I was just brain thinking, and I was like, not for a video idea at all, not that, but I was like, what franchises should have been left at a trilogy? And that's not my final thoughts on this film. But you know what jumped to my mind? Because there's never been another Indiana Jones, right? And I don't think you mentioned Adventure there, and that's what's going back to yesterday. The closest thing I feel we've had to Indiana Jones since Indiana Jones is actually Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah, I'd agree to that.
Also should have been left at three films.
Yeah.
But obviously very different, very, very different films. You know, Pirates, different centuries for a start. But again, also Disney, that big budget experience, this is this character we follow going on this insane adventure. Here's, you know, it's set in the real world, but, you know, not fantasy. You know how I mentioned like the religious artifacts, right?
And
it's like the Davy Jones is actually a tentacle squid that's underground, and there was
but it's based
so
through
many
legend, and it's based through, you could not say religion, but yeah.
And I don't think as a genre, and I think maybe people feel like they're trapped under the guise of Indiana Jones, but it just makes me kind of like, please, can someone make some more original stuff? Because you look at the origin of Indiana Jones, it was George Lucas and those serials. And the comic strips, the way it had always been, the way he had his ideas for Star Wars, named after his dog, like the character would in the film. And it sounds much easier said, but it's simplistic storytelling. You know, the original idea was a trilogy of stories, like he'd done with his Star Wars film. His idea for 3 trilogies. And it is interesting with Indiana Jones that we are here discussing a 5th one. And obviously, there is no George Lucas, there is no Steven Spielberg. He chose to do West Side Story when push came to shove. I think he made the correct choice. Yeah. I also really like James Mangold as a director. He'd done Logan. He'd already retired one great on screen until Hugh Jackman's announced he's coming back for Deadpool 3 for some reason. So it's one of them where, even from the creative side of things, you know, Frank Marshall's producing this alongside Kathleen Kennedy. Frank Marshall produced Raiders of the Lost Ark. Kathleen Kennedy's worked on every single Indiana Jones films. I know it's going to upset some people if you say that aloud, but she really did make films before 2015. They just don't want to believe that she did. And it is really interesting. And the big one, Harrison Ford. You mentioned his interviews earlier. Harrison Ford spoke in these interviews saying he wouldn't have come back to play Indiana Jones. And I can't remember the word he used, but he basically implied if he didn't get to have Indiana Jones in this state of mind, basically, I don't want to say in the wrong generation, but if we're sort of segueing back into where we are in the story, Moon Day, the future, science fiction, that's you know, the time me and you obviously weren't alive, and our parents have very minimal memories, if they have memories of those landings as well. And it's one of them where, when Harrison Ford spoke about this in the press, he sort of said, you know, he's a character now out of time, that he's lived his life in the 30s, and now we're here in the 60s, he's retiring. People aren't interested in his subject matter. And I think, to me, to hear that from the lead actor, who we know has creative control in this series, who we know, you know, has said it on record, Indiana Jones dies with me, at Chris Pratt, unintentionally. It's just one of them where I understand the story and what they want us to do. Now, I also understand if people aren't going to take to it, because this isn't the same Indiana Jones. You go back to Crystal Skull, the Indiana Jones that rocks up on screen is the same Indiana Jones as he was in the other 3 films. And maybe that's an issue. Maybe that's something Harrison Ford never liked. You know, the one thing Harrison Ford, given this, and this is one of the reasons they fell out of Shire, Harrison Ford says, even if I don't like a project I worked on, I don't publicly say that. I will not slate what I've worked on. And he basically went mad at Shia LaBeouf for saying that the Crystal Skull story was terrible. So it's one of them where you understand the importance of the character, but for this to all be taking place in 69, the moon landing, as we said, I actually think it's quite an inspired choice, because again, it's 10 years younger than Harrison Ford. They could have done the 70s, but they went with the 60s. And even the villain side of things, having the, you know, which was very real, that the Nazi scientists would go and work for the Allies after the war. That did happen. And I think in the history sense, that's a great way to bring in Mads as the villain and his team of people. Obviously, they're Nazis. Obviously, they're villains and dodgy. But I like the fact that it's these things that I feel that Crystal Skull missed out on. And Crystal Skull's big advantage was the Cold War, but I never felt like they really delivered with the Cold War side of it.
They never leaned into it. They never leaned into the Cold War in that film, whereas this film heavily leans into, like you said, the space age coming in, the celebrations of Moon Day and everything like that, Indy retiring and that having an effect on things, and just the era that they're set in. You know, it really leans into it and leans into the history of it. And Indiana Jones is about history. It's about a man who goes and explores history, goes and views it through artifacts, you know, tries to protect the artifacts or tries to uncover their secrets. And that's how he goes about his daily life. And like you said, it's a really, really good choice of the film to make him the man out of time and to make it based around his retirement and to make it based around, you know, people don't want to listen to what he's saying anymore and stuff like that. And I just want to bring up Martin's comment here.
Yeah.
I brought the kids to see this film yesterday. They were bored. The 2 kids in my cinema were so bored. They were kicking the back of seats. They were causing a nuisance for the people in the cinema. But everyone else in the screening seemed to really like it. And maybe that's because when you get older, you have that sort of connection with, you know, people getting older, people starting to kind of wind down in their careers and one last ride. And I've always said, and I will always say, riding off into the sunset at the end of Last Crusade is one of the most perfect film endings ever.
And how do you top it with 2 more films? You can't, because they've already ridden off into the sunset.
Exactly.
And that's the entire problem doing a 4th and a 5th one. And kind of off Martin's comment too, with the kids were bored. You go to, perfect example, Force Awakens, right? One of the biggest films ever made. You had multiple generations there. And I've said this so many times on the channel. You had the ones that grew up in the 70s, the ones from in between the originals and the prequel generation. Then you had a new generation of kids. Now, for us and many others, we were like, oh my God, they're bringing back Han Solo, they're bringing back Princess Leia, they're bringing back Luke Skywalker, all these sides of things. But the kids, the 4 or 5-year-olds, they were getting a new generation of characters that they all took to. There's no denying. Anyone goes to Celebration, you see all the Rey cosplayers, they're all kids. You see a lot of adults doing it too, not to take that away from them. You see, it's a generational thing, Star Wars, and Indiana Jones can't be generational because it's one man, one person. And I think Crystal Skull, again, I mentioned there's some fans that got to it, our age group. Now, a lot of people our age will say that their parents showed them the original films, which it seemed very normal. Mine didn't. My dad's never seen them, which is still remarkable. But I got into Indiana Jones when Crystal Skull came out because it was everywhere. I was like, what's this film? I've never seen that. That's Han Solo. I want to see this. I've recognized the Boulder run off TV before because everyone is in the Boulder. And it does make you think, what cultural impact has Indiana Jones had from the year 2008 to 2023? None. It's not a character that's been back. And this is why this isn't official by any means, but I've always thought they only did a 5th film to eradicate the 4th film. Not eradicate in the sense of...
I get that feeling as well.
I think it's we didn't deliver that 4th film. We're going to do it one last time.
We apologize. He hasn't ridden off into the sunset fully yet. He tried to twice now, and it hasn't quite worked out. Let's have one final adventure. Let's put everything on the line. And as we go into it later on in this review, let's have him be ready to die in the past, in the place where he wanted to go the most, or in the place that he holds, you know, as one of his most historical, marveling kind of moments and stuff like that, living through history, which is something he could never do. He could only ever live it through the artifacts, so to actually be there. And that's we'll talk about the kind of the time travel and everything like that towards the end of the review, but you can never top what Last Crusade did.
Exactly.
Everything. Crystal Skull tried to bring it back, and this film, I think, did a better job of that. Or at least a better job of closing off kind of all lines and everything like that. And maybe a little bit further down the line, maybe in a few years, Harrison Ford will give his blessing to someone to take up the mantle or for the stories. I don't know. You never know.
I don't think
in film.
I don't think it's about. I don't think Kathleen Kennedy will either, because she's also got the 40-year history on this series. Which I mean, but then again, we don't know how long that contract's going to be at Disney moving forward, and there's so many questions it raises. And kind of even sticking with Harrison Ford, this feels, when I say this feels like an Indiana Jones film, maybe not by template, maybe not by how the first 3 function, but in terms of a story arc, you mentioned Last Crusade there. One of the reasons Last Crusade works so much better than the others. And I say better than the others, I mean, they're all incredible films. The character arc Indiana Jones has in that film, it is not the failed father, but it is the relationship with his father, with Senior, the obsession, everything in that. That's the most personal Indiana Jones has been until this film. And I'll still say Last Crusade obviously has the edge because you can't top a father-son dynamic for something they spent the whole lives trying to figure out.
Riding. You can't literally top off riding into the sunset.
Exactly. And this is where this one is, that for Harrison Ford's character to be introduced to us in this horrendous apartment, being an angry old man, grumpy at his neighbors, it does make you think that, okay, this is going to be a character piece, and it very much feels like a character piece. He's 80 years old. Actor, not character, sorry. And he can't be doing the stuff we've seen. Even in Crystal Skull, he's in his 60s at that point. But his character inherently coming in. The reason this story is because there's a story for him, and it is personal. It is not trying to get over the death of his son, because it's that to a point. Like but his life has fell apart with his son's death. And
I feel like very quickly, I feel like the line delivery in this film he has more energy for than the previous film.
I think this is Harrison's film through and through. I think he's the best thing in this film. And I think really, genuinely, his performance in this is great. I mean, I'll just be honest, I had a bit of tears at the final scene. And I know a lot of people have said the same thing at the cinema. And I would sort of jump in even of that I know that Marion's not in this till the ending. And some people don't like the fact that they weren't together because they got married in that last one. But again, bringing in the Shire stuff, I think it makes sense that, obviously I don't know what it's like to lose a child. I don't have a child for a start, but you hear of many relationships where people have lost, someone between them and that's put them apart. It's very real. And I think the placement of what's happened to Indiana Jones, the fact that none of the kids care about his lecture that he's doing because something exciting and modern's happened, it's really interesting their approach of that. And then Helena coming into it, I guess, with New York as well, that suddenly there's this person that's interested in what he's interested in. And it's not adventure in the sense he's going out on adventure. He's sort of dragged along because he has to, because the Nazis have returned. And the kind of New York stuff, it's hard just to group it all together. But obviously we get the big set piece with the parades. One thing I'll say, I know the Indiana Jones films have been dark, right? We've seen Nazis, we've seen faces melted off, we've seen people's hearts being ripped out their stomach. There was a lot of pretty brutal scenes. I'm talking like them killing off the other teachers. Antonio Banderas later on, absolute waste. And it was like, it felt a bit darker. And is that the sense that because 12A, not 12A like the rating, but because in films these days you can get away with things being more darker, but it really did feel like, not like these Nazis are bad people, but it felt like this is tone-wise a lot darker than the other Indiana Jones films. I know that Temple of Doom is as dark as it can probably get for some. But what were your thoughts on the New York side of things, and I guess sort of pairing the heroes into the villains and moving forward with the plot?
I mean, I enjoyed it. It's one of those I kind of identify the heroes and villains straight away from kind of the scenes that they are introduced. So you immediately kind of knew the henchmen, who they were straight away, and introducing Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character in that way as like the first person to actually be interested in what Indy has to say for the first time in what seems like years. It perks the interest, and it kind of starts the adventure off really nicely, having a bit of betrayal in there as well, and having a chase scene throughout New York was pretty fun to watch as well. Because I wasn't sure I was going to think about that chase scene and stuff like that, seeing it in the trailers, but in the end I actually really enjoyed it. I think it was filled with various different bits of comedy. It was, even though it had kind of death and violence thrown into it as well, it did seem very engaging as far as, kind of pushing along the story, but also having a good set piece. And, you have to have at least one set piece that is tied to the time of the film, whether that is nuking the fridge or whatever you want from that from that film previously. But every single film so far has had at least one set piece that is tied into the time that the film was set. And this was that set piece. And I think it's probably the best one they've done so far, which has been tied into that time. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I think as well, again, the whole concept that because I remember when they announced that Mads was playing a Nazi, it's sort of perfect casting, but at the same time, people are like, oh, wait, they're still doing the Nazis as the villains. And I think they'd worked out it would be the space race stuff, obviously Cold War to a point, and it does work. It makes sense. And it's not just, Indiana Jones hates Nazis. Like, obviously, we know he does, but it's even that familiarity bringing it back, because you could do Russians again. Very contextual for now, I guess, but at the same time, is if they're leaning back into that past, if it's something from his past that's coming back to arguably haunt him or have him be involved, it would make it sense to be something that he encountered in the war, and that it would be, a scientist like Mads who's been sort of trying to do something behind the scenes, have this scheme going on. I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of what's realistic, because I'll tell you, this is the one thing I hate about Indiana Jones, not the films, the discussion around Indiana Jones. Now, nuking the fridge is something which I know it's a term. I know people hate it. Fine. I think it's ridiculous too. What I can't cope with is in a series where hearts have been ripped out of bodies for ritual worship, to have the Holy Grail and the knights that have been there for hundreds of years, to have the Ark of the Covenant ripping and melting Nazi faces off. That's why I don't mind the fridge as much. Time travel. All I'm saying is that maybe not supernatural, but that, like, not extraterrestrial, because that was the last film, but that sort of what would be the unknown past the artifact, right? If there's a word for something like that, that's always been an enigma with Indiana Jones. And I will not stop at, the Nazis wanted this dial, because in the concept of an Indiana Jones story, the villain, more often not, meets their fate through what they are pursuing, which is how Indy almost dies in that third film, in Last Crusade. One of the reasons why it works so well is because he also became obsessed. The dial, I really like. I know it's not real in the sense, I know the dial exists, not in the context of, I think it was built a couple of hundred years after where they go back in time to, but there's a lot of real history in this film, like the others they've drawn from and they've moved forward with and done their own thing. I have no issue with them doing it. I know that's jumping the gun, but we're talking about the 1969 moon landing, and immediately the scientist that did it all has tried to go back in time and change World War II. I don't think that's bad for an Indiana Jones plot. I actually think that is the kind of thing that would make Indiana Jones come out of retirement one final time.
Yeah. I'm kind of stuck with this one, because as much as I do actually want to say I enjoyed the film. I thought it was a good film. I really enjoyed the adventure that was attached to it. But there is a line with Indiana Jones films, and I feel like this film crossed it. I feel like Crystal Skull crossed it, but the other films didn't. And I was trying to figure out, what is it that makes it cross the line? Why am I okay with the first three films and the weird supernatural things that happen in those, but I'm not okay with, aliens, and I'm not okay with, maybe the time travel of this film? I think it's because in the first three films, the supernatural elements that are added to the storyline, I'm trying to think of how to word it. I
don't know the word. There should be a word for it, right?
They are legend, right?
That's probably about the time.
They are written in legend. So whether it is a folk tale or whether it is stories that are meant to kind of pass on through a lesson that you should learn from it. So the whole Holy Grail thing is, it's the chalice of Christ. It can give you eternal youth. That's something internalized that becomes kind of externalized, instead of it being, this is a crystal skull, it's an alien, and that's what you're after. It's very different. And with this film, it being, we're after a dial that is kind of a historical dial from Greek kind of history, that's fine. But I feel like I would have preferred it if it was something based in Greek mythology, because then it becomes a myth, not aliens or not time travel. Something that is a bit too sci-fi instead of mythology, folklore, and legend. And that's where it starts to lose me slightly. And I think that's fair. Why I wasn't okay with that.
And I think that's, Dave, who's on loads of my videos, messaged me. He absolutely loved it all until the ending. And he says that was too far, the time travel. And I think that's what's going to split the most people. Because
as soon as they mention, the dial will give you the ability to travel through time, immediately I was like, so they're going to travel through time. That's just going to happen at some point in the film. There's going to be a moment.
It's been rumored for a long time as well, hadn't it? Like, that was surrounding it. And I know that there were photos of the Roman soldiers on the beach in Sicily, which I'd seen unintentionally. So I was like, okay, how are they going to do something like this? And I know we'll get to it with the ending part. But before we get to the time travel, the one thing we get, which I really miss, which I don't think Crystal Skull did on too much, not just the sense of adventure.
We get the map.
We got in. Well, not just the map, but we get Indiana Jones actually
globetrotting,
like searching, exploring on an
Yeah.
adventure. And I know that someone will say, "Oh, but Chris Score does go on an adventure." To a point, it never feels like, he's an archaeologist, so his fascination with finding the tomb, that sort of, yes, it's the MacGuffin of the story, but I like that they have to go and find it. And one of the reasons why Raised Stark is not only one of the best ones ever made. There's so many reasons that go in towards that. The story is simple. We have to get to the Ark before the Nazis do. That's the story to the film. That's what they talk about when they're in the lecturing building. We've got to get there before them. This is very much what this film does at a very different pace. That is a neck and neck fight, us v them, keep encountering each other. And it's bringing it back to its basics. And James Mangold's approach as director obviously is very different to Spielberg. And if you look at the films Mangold's done, very much character studies. Look at Ford v Ferrari, Christian Bale. You look at, of course, Logan's obvious one, Walk the Line, Johnny Cash. I've not seen 3:10 to Yuma. That's one of the ones I still need to see. But as a director, he's very good at character pieces. And I think and people will disagree with this, I think he gets Indiana Jones. I think he knows what makes this character work. But it's getting that approach of, how do we do this to an 80-year-old Indiana Jones? And that's where Phoebe Waller-Bridge comes into it, that some of the more physical things she can do. And I would say this, there's a lot of references to the past. It never feels like it's slapping you on the head with fan service. There'll be bits, of course, references. Of course, there'll be references. I don't mind that any film. The Indiana Jones films have always been self-referential. Look at Temple of Doom and the gun sketch from Raiders of the Lost Ark, which they can't proceed with. But I think Mangold knows what he's doing. And I know that Salah pops up quite early on in this. John Rhys Davies returning. He's fine. It's great to see him back on the big screen. Of course, he offers other things to the story, which is also fine. But it's that's probably one of the few big crowd moments. And I'm kind of wondering that we sort of mocked Marvel for a few months. And I think audiences are starting to grow tired of here's references, here's cameos, here's this, here's that, here's he. Indiana Jones is different, of course. That Salah was in 2 of those first 3 films. Was he in The Wedding in Crystal Skull?
No, so he wasn't. And the reason why he wasn't was because he said that his character is worth more than that just for his cheap cameo.
Yes, that brings back. And then he had a cheap cameo, which also, I'm going to say, not that I'm just desperate for Kay Khan to return. They mentioned that Salazar, Indiana Jones, you brought my family over during the war. That could have easily been shot around saying the same thing, which would have meant a lot more, because obviously the Americans were fighting in Asia across that war. Different story, but again, it's fine to have that fan service, but the adventure side of things I enjoyed. And kind of talking, I guess we can say, with Morocco, we get the tuk-tuk chase, which is all over the marketing. Now, you weren't at Celebration. They showed this sequence to us, so this was the 5-minute sequence they showed us, and I thought it was entertaining. And the other thing I'm going to say about Harrison Ford, which I'm sort of seeing people talk about more, when I mentioned that they understand how to write and what to do with him, they know he can't be at the forefront of these stunts anymore. They know they can't have him on top of cars, jumping across buildings and whatnot. And they're not trying to kid us. You look at Christopher Lee in Star Wars, they have the stunt double, which everyone knows is a stunt double. Still love the fact he does a front flip in Revenge of the Sith. But we know that Christopher Lee can't do that. Whereas I felt like even when it stunts, it feels like Indiana Jones would be doing this at his age.
Yeah.
And I think they were very finite in, again, the tuk-tuk chase, he's mainly behind the wheel for the sequence. And it makes sense. But in terms of the action, in terms of that side of it, I think they delivered again that you can follow the action. It's not just horrific quick cuts. It's very stable. I don't think the CG looked bad. Obviously, someone's going to say it's a $300 million film. Yes, it doesn't look like a $300 million film. It's not Tom Cruise in a tuk-tuk chase where you know it would be him. But I just was curious with your thoughts, because I know obviously we're going to meander and get to the fun stuff very shortly.
Yeah.
But just, I guess up until we get some deep sea diving, not £250 per person.
Yeah, I mean, the Moroccan sequence is okay. The one thing I didn't like about it was that it was a bit busy for a chase sequence. It felt very modern for a chase sequence, whereas it could have been very simple. They have a very kind of similar chase sequence in, I think was it in Raiders, where, like they're just trying to chase the car across and trying to figure out who's in which car and stuff like that. Something as simple as
simplistic.
Simplistic.
Less is more.
This is so much more. This was a long sequence, and this was one with, multiple parties chasing each other, very difficult to keep up with it and stuff like that. I feel like if there was one scene that could be kind of taken out of the film, this wasn't needed. This absolutely wasn't needed. It could have been like Helena going straight away to Greece and then not being able to find it, not being able to find someone, and Indy kind of cutting her off and saying, well, I know someone who can get us there, kind of thing.
And talking the Greece stuff, did you know Antonio Banderas was in this film? Because I didn't.
Yes, because I'd watched the trailers.
Maybe I didn't recognize him in the trailers. That's my fault. He popped up. Now, I've not seen Puss in Boots. I know he's got the voice. Tom Butler messaged him earlier with chat, and he said Antonio Banderas also could have been short round, which was a great point. But again, the one thing I liked, right, in these films, Indiana Jones, he always knows people. That sounds like a really pathetic thing to say as praise to the series, but it feels like it's like world building, right? That he's warned that he's been an adventurer, he has a history, and it's not the same three people. That's why characters like Salah, I think, were always good to bring in. The one thing I struggled with, I love the diving sequence. I love the fact they had to go to the shipwreck. Killing off everyone on that boat, I don't want to say felt extreme. Obviously, the Nazis would do that, but Antonio Banderas to come in for like 5 minutes and be disposed of in a pretty grim way. I don't want to sit there and say they'd wasted him. I don't think his sequence is memorable, as in Antonio Banderas' performance. The eels, I loved. I loved the eels. I thought it was a great little thing to do. But that, I didn't have an issue with the runtime, but if you were sort of chopping 5 minutes, you could eradicate a fair amount of that stuff on there. Sending the Nazis to the wrong way for them to clock 30 seconds later, just follow them. They're going to the right place. Not lost me a bit, but it was just a bit like with sort of tethering here. But I did like that they were building up toward we're going to find the tomb, which again feels very Indiana Jones. They've got to find the tomb, and that's the goal. And again, that's the stuff I felt like they were missing with Crystal Skull. Obviously, there's lots of exploring in that film, but it just felt a bit more traditional in this sense. But there are times where it plodded along. That's what I don't have much to say about Greece. The stuff I really liked was the actual cave exploration, where they get to the tomb, where they've got to not necessarily do challenges as such, but I like that it starts to feel the stakes get higher and higher as we're getting nearer that tomb and what's going to be in there and whatnot. But what were your thoughts just quickly on Greece before we, I guess, get into the proper ending? Which
proper
is the big bit,
Greece part. Well, I'd say that it was a bit wasteful to kill off every single character that wasn't integral to the plot. We get Teddy surviving as well, who we haven't really mentioned yet, who's just kind of like the extra tag along member of the crew, a little bit of kind of comedic relief, but also being kidnapped and therefore needing saving at various different points. So like you've got that as a character, but at the same time, it was a sequence. It was a nice breakup of the story. We got a few kind of heartfelt moments in there, with Indy talking to Helena on the ship and stuff like that. But the eels were cool. The fact that we got snakes somehow in the film of some sort was a nice nod back to the previous films. We didn't get Indy going into a knife or a gunfight or a gun into a knife fight at any point, which is a shame. I know it's been done a few times over the films, but I would have liked to have seen it one last time if this is kind of the farewell. As far as the actual Grease stuff, when we actually get down to it, I loved it. I think it was my favorite part of the film. It felt like a proper old school Indiana Jones film, like going through the caves, going through the different sections, walking across the rickety bridges, trying to solve puzzles to get into the tomb. That's Indiana Jones right there. That's what the previous film was missing. It immediately took me back. It was like, this is a fantastic sequence. This is brilliant.
He's an archaeologist. He knows history, and I think that's what Crystal Skull not only missed, but I feel that people aren't not talking about enough. That obviously people like the adventure and whatnot, but there's so much that goes right with these films because of him as his character, what he does, what he stands for.
He's a history nerd.
Yeah, he's a teacher, and like an amazing thing Stephen Carty showed on Twitter earlier was this was like if you go back to Raiders when he's in the what's it called, when he's like lecturing, he's obviously got clean shave and everything. By the time he wakes up after the first flight, he's got his 4-day stubble. He's basically already become the Indiana Jones hero thing, which is things like that go a long way. But yeah, I'm with you on the Greece stuff. It was at that point, even them exploring tombs, it just felt like this is it. This is what he does. This is what he's done. This is what his life's like built towards. It's ridiculous. But because Crystal Skull was so, and again, credit to them for going out wildly and trying to do something different. For me, it didn't work, but it is that like it was the unknown, right? Oh, these are thousands of years old. We can't really put our hands on what this is. And it always felt like that. And I've only seen it twice, and obviously that's both over the last sort of 3 years. But with this one, it's like he not only he knows his stuff, but he's in a race. The other people know their stuff behind him. The people chasing them know their stuff. They're coming for him, and I liked all of that. And even with my biggest criticism is heading into now this film. When we get the amazing moment where the standoff, right? They've opened the tomb.
Yeah.
He's got to watch. I was loving the intrigue of this. And I love the moment when Mads puts the watch on, Indiana Jones realizes straight away, this isn't going to go the way he thinks. That he clocks that watch is they're going to go to the past, like not that past, this one.
Yeah.
And where I get lost with this film is this is really petty. When Indiana Jones gets shot, now I've no issue, and I've seen quotes like they've destroyed another old hero, and a lot of people were reading about this film. Obviously, premiered at Cannes, right? People have been able to read about it for 6 weeks. The vibe people took to this was that Indiana Jones is a frail old man who can't do anything without Helena because they need a strong female character. That's a lot of people's vibe with this film, and a lot of people have read that online. A lot of other channels have gone with that, with the clicks, have gone with things like that. I've seen it discussed a lot online. It wasn't an issue for me in sense of like leading into this film. I didn't know he was going to get shot, but I had seen people saying, "Oh, we hear that Helena's going to be all over, and we hear that Indiana Jones has been reduced to nothing." Me watching all those sequences, I'm there like, what the fuck have these people been on again? Like, is it just the usual? Is it the usual thumbnails? Is it the usual red laser eyes at Kathleen Kennedy? I just couldn't believe the nonsense I'd seen. But unfortunately, some of the nonsense that I also seen in the film was Indiana Jones being shot. And I thought, oh, they're going to kill him. And now they're going to go back in time to save Indiana Jones. And I was worried. I was like, no. Please don't do anything that ridiculous. And that was the one moment I feared this could go stupid. But instead, he didn't really seem affected by,
like being a champ, doesn't he?
Did he get shot in the heart or like the shot?
He gets shot in the shoulder. He gets shot in the shoulder.
Okay,
and
shoulder.
It's so funny because reading through the description here on Wikipedia, just to go back through the plot, it says gravely injured.
Yes,
Indiana Jones.
And they acted like he was gravely injured, and I was there like, this guy's just got dragged out of the cave with them. He's been put on a flight with them. He's going to fly off an airplane with them. He's done all right. And I just felt that they really oversold. And I don't know if that's them trying to create higher stakes for the ending of the film. And I think that's where I had sort of had I know it's a really minor issue to have, but it happens in a lot of films. It's the fake peril of the lead. I understand why a lot of storytellers go for it.
Yeah.
But it felt too easy in this. I've got no issue with Helena obviously getting involved with the time travel stuff, the kid in the other flight. I have no issue with that either. But I just felt like they could have just captured him. And I know it sounds really boring, like cinema sense and crap like that, when it's like, oh, why didn't they do this? But it just, the stakes of your lead getting shot and then being fined for another hour, I think I do struggle with that. And I see that in a lot of films these days. And I was also worried that he was going to die and they'd use time travel to save him, which to me would have been the worst.
That would have been horrific. That would have been terrible.
Which I'm hoping was never ever considered. But just your thoughts on the shot stuff before I guess we get to talk about time travel, as Mike Ruffalo puts it.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as they shoot him, I'm like, oh shit, okay, maybe the rest of the story is him going to be bleeding out. And I mean, I did have a feeling that, oh god, they're maybe going to go with the whole kind of saving him. Maybe he's the one. My initial thought was maybe he's the one in the tomb, kind of thing. Yeah. And it's not actually Archimedes' tomb. It's actually Indiana Jones's tomb that they're visiting, and he's taken the watch. And, he's kind of being branded with the dial because maybe he dies in a plane or something like that. Like, that was where my thoughts were going to. And I would have been okay with that, I guess, slightly. I mean, I'm okay with the ending of him still being alive and kind of working out and marrying and stuff like that. But at the same time, him actually dying in the past in that way and it being his tomb in the end that they visit and him being the one holding the dial and the dial's just kind of constantly looping through time would have been also interesting. I know we're going to go on to talk about the time travel here. So I'm going to bring forward a fan theory that I have seen online this week on the Indiana Jones subreddit for the people who have seen the film.
At least they've seen it.
Yeah. Indiana Jones, because of the events of this film, is immortal up until the point of 1969. Because he has to go back in time. He has to go and time travel back to Archimedes to get those things going across. So up until that point, he has to live and he has to exist because Archimedes' tomb is always going to be there, which means
it's a grandfather paradox, isn't it?
Yeah, all of the stuff previously, such as the voodoo heart, the Kalima kind of stuff, every single time he's been shot, every single time he's been on an adventure and almost died, he was never in peril. He was always going to live. And that's why time travel should not be in films like this.
the thing I'll give it is that if they'd have done that in the opening scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark,
yeah,
then I'd get it. But I don't mind it. It's a smart read of it. I'll give it that. Like someone to come up with that. But the time travel stuff's interesting. So I mean, before we even consider time travel, I'll go back to the Nazi plan, right? I love the fact Mads' character. I mean, is it just because it's Mads Mikkelsen I like it more?
Yeah,
probably.
He just wants to straight up kill Hitler and just replace him. I'm okay with that.
Like there'd be nothing worse than, oh my god, we're gonna have like not a Hitler lover, but it's like he's gonna go back and tell Hitler like, don't do this 3 things. I love it. It's like Hitler was a load of shit. I would have won the war. I'm smarter than all of you. I'm gonna go do it. And there's this moment, and this sounds really sadistic. So I hope this doesn't come across bad on the internet. When Mads dons the Nazi uniform, I'm like, you know what? Like, I know he's about to try and become a Führer, and I was like, he can pull off the Führer. That sounds terrible. But I was like, if you wanted an actor, and this is insane criticism I've seen over the last year. I've seen people complain that Mads Mikkelsen has been cast in Indiana Jones as a Nazi. If you would like, this sounds horrible. You're going to do it in a massive blockbuster film. Let's get this out of the way first. A big blockbuster. You want to do... I don't care if there's time travel or there's not. If you're looking for a Nazi and you want someone of Eastern European descent, you're going to immediately go to Mads Mikkelsen to play any villain, any Eastern European villain. But to convince Mads to play a Nazi, I don't think he'd have said yes to anything. I think it would have been the fact it's Indiana Jones. Do you want to play this guy who is going to go and this? Maybe some will say he's wasted because we know the talent of Mads as an actor. But I think Mads Mikkelsen, I have him in this elite bracket with Benedict Cumberbatch, right? They can do dramas. They can do independent dramas. They've done TV. They can do blockbusters. And these are actors who are very happy doing blockbusters as long as they also get to do their dramas and their independent stuff. And I think there's very few that do that. They are not sellouts at all. But you do get some actors that will only do big films because they want to get in the convention circuit, or you'll get some that don't want to do anything aside from dramas, which I respect as well. But there are very few actors who, as I said, Mads and Benedict are having this like elite category of actors for that. Does that sound strange?
No, I'm gonna come in with this one. I have a lot of respect for actors who take on roles like this.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people can kind of put it off as, oh, well, it's very easy to act like that because you just act evil. But it will take you to quite a dark place to put yourself in those characters' boots and act like pure villainy and pure evil. And certain actors are able to pull it off and are able to work with it. And certain actors are not able to do that. And Mads Mikkelsen is a fantastic, seasoned actor. He could pull off most roles when placed into his hands. So, the second that he took on a role as a Nazi who wants to actually go above above Hitler and really kind of make sure the war wins, that he has the same ideology. That's going to take you to our place, but he acted it really well. He did a very good job of conveying across that character. That doesn't make it bad or not and make him typecast or anything like that. He is an actor. He has gone and done the character role, and he's done a good job at it. It doesn't mean that he has the same thoughts and feelings about the character. It doesn't mean that he's really got into like method acting with the character or anything like that. What it means is he's able to put himself into that situation for those scenes. He's able to act the shit out of it, and he's able to give the best performance possible. he's able to show kind of how truly evil those people were in the past, and he's able to actually make it passable. He's able to make you believe that tyranny and evil. That's not the sign of a person being typecast. That's a sign of a person being perfectly cast for the role. And that's my view on it. And I have massive respect for people who do play these villainous roles, whether they are Nazis or other kind of hate groups or anything like that, because it's tough. It's hard to put yourself into that place. It's hard to be able to act on those kind of terms, because I'm hoping a lot of the time, I'm hoping near 100% of the time, they do not believe what they're acting in. They do not believe the character's motivations. Well, you never know nowadays. Sometimes certain actors have certain opinions, and
John Voight.
But nearly 100% of the time, they don't believe in what's going on. But what they do is they commit to the role, and they preserve that level of history. This film puts it very clear. Nazis are bad, Nazis are evil. And I feel like certain nations and certain people need reminding that Nazis are actually the bad guys. And this film does a very good job of reminding people that Nazis are the bad guys, and we should repeat that over and over again. And I think that's why they go back to Nazis in this film. I'm okay with Indiana Jones saying, well, what's he done wrong? He's like, he's a Nazi straight away, just like bang, you immediately know they're evil. And that's a great way of conveying across kind of the modern quarrels of the world, shall we say, in one simple sentence. But I'm completely okay with Mads Mikkelsen's performance in this. I don't think he's typecast at all. I think he's perfectly cast.
Absolutely, and kind of in line with that, not to slag off Chris, I feel like I've done that a bit. The one thing the Indiana Jones films have never had, this isn't a criticism of the actors that have played the villains in the films, but they've never gone for like the big A-listers for the villains. And I know that Cate Blanchett is a massive name.
I know Cate Blanchett, Ray Winston.
and this is it with Crystal Skull. And again, on paper, right, in the year, I don't know when they would have entered pre-production, probably 2006. You're in Hollywood. Someone says, hey, Spielberg and Lucas are teaming up with Harrison Ford for another Indiana Jones film. They're looking for a villain. Every actor in the world would have wanted to be in that. And I understand why the scope was John Hurt's perfect for Indiana Jones, to be honest, but everyone, that was a very big thing. Shia LaBeouf as well, 2008, off the back of Transformers, off the back of Even Stevens, being the sort of the follow-up. He was the golden boy of Hollywood. He was the one everyone was talking about having this incredible career that could have been. And I would always go so far as say that it was almost too big. And that's not its fault. But I like the fact that in this film, not every actor was like an A-lister, right? And I'll bring up Boyd Holbrook, who was like the henchman sort of in this. No one really, not saying no one knows him as an actor, but he's popped up in a lot of other things, but not everyone's going to be able to tell you his roles and everything like this. Mads is by name, a very big name to, I think, have as a villain for this franchise. Now, I think he's a bigger name than Cate Blanchett to probably the popular world, right? They'll have seen more of his stuff than the niche of Cate Blanchett. But you've got like multiple Academy Award winner with Cate Blanchett. You've got someone that's like, in terms of talents, probably the best actress of a generation. I felt like that is maybe too big for Indiana Jones as a villain. I know I'm on a complete tangent now, but I just think that Mads, everything just lined up perfectly for him to be in this film. And if you're going to be completely honest, or not you, sorry, like me, I don't think there's anyone else on the planet I'd want to play that role. Like, oh God, Christoph Waltz is going to play like another Nazi. Like, really? Like, and that's probably who people would have just fan casted if that was.
It would have been Christoph Waltz, or it would have been Daniel Bruhl, or it would have been
and it all would have been too easy.
Germany or Austria or something like that.
Exactly. And I like the fact it was Mads. I really, really do. And kind of in line of that, heading into his fate, right? His first failure, I guess, in this film. He's had a pretty precise, since being took out by a lamppost in the opening prologue. Actually, he's had a pretty good run of getting things right, and he doesn't just miscalculate. He doesn't really clock that it's not going to work as planned. And I love the fact that he's had been so efficient till now. And like every other Indiana Jones villain, his death is his own doing. He's the one that gets the dial. He's the one that goes back into the past. But it's not the past he thinks it's going to be. And I just love, and this is where the time travel stuff I think is going to really kick in now. This is going to work I think this either works or it doesn't work. I don't think you can have a middle ground for the time trial, for the time travel bit. And for me, it works, but only because they make it crystal clear in this that you could only ever have gone back to this point in time. Now, that might not work for a lot of people, so which is fine. I've got no issue. And you know what? I'd much rather have this be something that people aren't going to agree on, something divisive, but they've gone for it. Like, they didn't just do a really easy, he stopped him before he went up into the vortex and all was saved and he retired. I like the fact that they did probably as risky a thing as, it's what he says in the film, right? Is this a lot? I mean, I was last week, but he says, now we've conquered space, it's time. Basically, that's like the villain motivation.
He's the Doctor from Doctor Who.
But it's like they did space in the sense of they had they call them interdimensional beings, whatever they want to do in Crystal Skull. But as Spielberg jokes about in interviews, they're aliens. Go back in time is the next like insane thing for Indiana Jones to do, and I like the fact they do this only because it's the flawed villain plan again that's so often right of Indiana Jones, that it was always going to happen. Now, the bit I maybe don't like, and maybe others might, Archimedes, if that's how it's pronounced. I know nothing about this guy. Ancient history is not the history I did at school and sort of have done in my own time since. It felt like it was some kind of... Have you seen the Oppenheimer memes about Einstein?
I'm gonna use the words Bill and Ted to describe this scene. It felt very Bill and Ted.
Yeah, like to some people that would have meant everything, but to 90% of people it didn't. And it felt like here's this insane like Avenger-esque cameo. And even to the character of Indiana, just if he'd have waffled about Archimedes for 40 years, I'd have got the importance of him meeting Archimedes, but he didn't.
It's tough because you can look at Last Crusade and go,
exactly. He meets the knight. He meets the knight.
He meets the knight in the tomb, but the knight in the tomb has been there sealed in time for so long because they're guarding the grave.
Yeah.
And that gives it the explanation. This is he goes back in time and meets his hero. I don't like that. That's where it's and that's completely understandable. And I think that's the line that's going to have people with this film or against that. I feel is that if you're on board with time travel, which is tough, but I was fine. I'm trying to find a way of them making the characters think it's going to be time travel, but pulling a switcheroo and making it something else.
But I just don't think you can. Once the idea is we're going to do time travel, the idea is we do time travel, and I commend it. Whether it works is the eternal question that people will probably speak of for years to come. But for me, I don't mind it. And again, I liked the ideas behind it. It was just the exaggerated, he goes on a chase of all the horses to get to the wreckage. Also, how brutal this film is, the corpses of Mads in this as well, like burned off. I liked that sort of stuff, but it was just the bit I don't like.
The one way they could have made it work, the one way, and I'm going to go ahead and say this right now, is if the ending of, I don't know why I'm thinking this, but if the time portal was the Bermuda Triangle. Because at least that's like a tangible mystery. Random planes go missing. Was that
rumored for one of the films? I can't remember.
It would have worked better if this was the way they explained it, because then you link it to a real world mystery instead of it being, oh, this is just going to lead us to some coordinates. We're going to fly to that place in the sky and suddenly we're going to go back in time. If they'd have gone, where is this time point that people keep on disappearing into? Or where is this time point where we're going to be able to go back in time? Oh, it's in the Bermuda Triangle. You're suddenly then thinking, okay, we understand the Bermuda Triangle. That's a real thing. A lot of planes and ships go missing and disappearing. I wonder where they went. And then that would work better, I feel. But there was no real world explanation for it. And that's what drew me away from it.
Yeah.
And I didn't like the whole meeting Archimedes thing.
And that's the bit for me. I like them going in the past. I like the time travel bits.
It could,
but I just think the meeting bit is just like, that bit doesn't work, but I don't mind the rest of it. I like Archimedes picking up the watch and taking that with him to his corpse. I like him knowing he's got to build the dial. But then how do you have that moment? And then it sort of jumps. And again, this isn't any report or anything. It feels not even reshooty, but it's like Indy's desperate to die there, which I get why his character, he's lost his son.
Yeah.
He thinks he's got nothing left for him. He thinks no one cares. And I like the fact that he doesn't want to go, but unfortunately he gets knocked out and has to go. It does feel very like...
I like the fact it wasn't his choice.
It wasn't his choice, and it feels quick. That's my criticism. But at the same time, I don't mind Helena being the one that punches him to tell him, like, you need to sort yourself out now.
Yeah.
But he still does have stuff to live for. And I know it sort of jumps past it, but the waking up back in 1969, the return of Marion, I won't lie, I had a bit of tears in my eyes at the reunion. I assume she'd be in the film. There was no way they weren't going to have Karen Allen in it. But I appreciate why they didn't want her in the core of the story. Because again, if you have the husband and wife together and no son, then how do you do that dynamic? And again, it's out of their control, and it always had been. So the final scene to me, and this is a big thing, they didn't kill Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
That was everyone's question, right? It was Harrison Ford's retiring his characters. He killed Han Solo. He didn't kill Deckard. Is he going to kill Indiana Jones? He also didn't get sent to the retirement home like people kept joking about he would. I really like the ending because I'm not saying the door's open for adventure. It's clearly not, but it's a very, very, like, we're done here. He's reunited with his wife. He's had his companions with him in this room, and he can now live out the rest of his life and be at peace with what's happened to his son. I love that ending. I think, and the performance, there's no words. The last scene, just the acting that Harrison does with Karen, I really enjoy it. And, when we look back in history, when we look back at his career, his roles, we all know Indiana Jones is his favorite character. And that scene feels like Harrison Ford saying goodbye, which he is. And I think it's a pretty powerful final scene to go out. And again, it's not big, it's not gloss, it's not a sunset, but because they've already done that sunset, I think that's the best thing they can do given the circumstances.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think kind of post him being knocked out, the final ending for the series, for the character, is so well done. It puts closure on all the characters. There are no more adventures that he can go on. The last adventure he's going to do is just be kind of living his life as normal, not having to go off anymore, and having other people around him, having his family, having his friends around him and stuff like that, and actually having something to live for. That's a lovely ending. That's a great way to finish it. And this whole film was about him retiring and about him kind of doing one last ride, and he had that one last ride and he made it out the other side, and now he has to live with the reality onwards from there. So you can take it as bittersweet, or you can take it as kind of a happy ending for the character, but either way, it's an ending for the character, which is something that the previous film didn't really give us. It gave us a continuation, and I guess Riding into the Sunset is still the perfect ending, but at least you've got finality with this film.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of saying that, I don't have much. I think that sort of covers the review, right? That sounds very sudden, but the reason why, this is a spoiler discussion. We've gone almost an hour and a half. Thank you to everyone that's been watching. Over 100 viewers as well so far across the stream. I've just got a couple of things to talk about. So we spoke a bit about box office earlier. I'm not going to do the whole box office spiel. I know we'll probably cover that in the coming weeks once we've got Mission Impossible, Barbie, Oppenheimer. We'll know that where this is going. We haven't mentioned another name so far yet, John Williams. 91 years old. An unbelievable final score for this film.
Phenomenal.
Whether this is the final score of his career, we thought it would. He said he was retiring. He then said he wants to do Bond. He then says he'll continue to do a Spielberg film if he's asked. If this is John Williams' final score, farewell. The greatest composer in film history and one of the greatest composers in his story, not film history as a whole. Incredible score. Lovely on the action set pieces, the quiet moments. He absolutely delivered as he always does. And it was amazing to be able to hear that again on the big screen. That's one of the reasons it felt like an Indiana Jones film. The music is as important to these films as the action, as the characters, as everything else. It is its own character. So just because when we're doing spoilers, because we can't really talk about, I like the music in this scene too.
Yeah.
It's John Williams. It deserves its own bit. Have you got anything to say on that, or if we want to sort of, I'll end it quickly, the Rotten Tomatoes thing, which is...
No, I want to say that the score was absolutely fantastic. It brought back elements from previous films. It brought in new areas of the score as well. Every single score fit the scene perfectly. It felt like an Indiana Jones film. And what a great kind of, send-off if that is John Williams' last score. I hope it isn't. I hope he has more to give. But this would be a very fitting send-off as well with the franchise.
Absolutely. And kind of in line of that, just with this film, final thoughts to me, I really enjoyed it. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And the kind of thing I said in the spoiler-free video was, it's closer to the original trilogy than it's closer to 4 in my mind, at least. I've seen this once. Am I going to see it again at the cinema? The answer is no.
There's
And I
too
don't
much
mean this in a
coming out.
horrible way. There is too much coming out. I have multiple viewings booked already of films not coming out for a while. And this is, again, I don't want to do a boring box office talk thing. But I think I said this in a spoiler-free review, and I've said to a lot of people since, this should never have come out in June. Ever. This should have been December. This December, we've got 2 releases. We've got Aquaman 2, which is going to bomb because DC's trajectory is the lowest it's ever been. And we've got Wonka, which could be a hit. We don't know. If Indiana Jones takes the mid-December slot, this film has 6 weeks to himself. It makes a lot of money. I think marketing-wise, people would be up for once June is out in November, or is it? I can't remember what's first, June or Hunger Games. Yeah. One of those two.
But
it's
also,
clean sweep.
It's like this is summer blockbuster season. There are so many blockbusters. This was a blockbuster of the past. This was a film that people feel
like it doesn't feel like a big summer blockbuster. No. It feels, if it had been in December, it would have been like, hey, there's this event film. What's the event? The final Indiana Jones, and it's Harrison Ford send off.
You hype it up.
Think, yeah, and I appreciate, you can't just click a button and delay a film, but had this have come out in December, I think this would have worked better for all parties involved. Again, the box office, we only got the opening weekend worldwide. But it is a shame that, and again, I saw Tom Cruise did a post on his socials with his tickets for Oppenheimer, Barbie, and Indiana Jones. And he did give credit, he said Harrison Ford's been playing this character for 40 years, which is remarkable, 42 years. Do you want an even more insane thing that made me think?
Go on.
Harrison Ford's played Indiana Jones for 42 years, right? And it still makes me think I'm flabbergasted. There's still only 36 years between Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick. And you think of the age gaps of Ford and Raiders to that versus Tom Cruise. It's scary. I think it goes to more show how young Tom Cruise was in truth, doing Top Gun. But it's just one of them where, for anyone curious at home, this film isn't going to make its money back. I know everyone sort of sits and says, I don't care about box office. That's fine if you don't. It isn't the be-all and end-all, but unfortunately the box office is what keeps studios afloat. The box office is what doesn't just keep them afloat. They use that data, because that's the audience that have turned up. They use that data to then in turn make more films, see what type of films they want to do. So for every time you still say the box office isn't important, I appreciate it's not important for you, but for the industry, unfortunately, it is. And this film hasn't delivered with it, but it is going to be because there's so many films coming out. I just think December's missed this. And you know what? We'll probably be saying the same thing, I think, Mission Impossible. It's going to be the biggest film of the year, I think. But even then, we'll be thinking, did this need July? Could this have done August? And I think we've had a very lackluster summer blockbuster season so far. Guardians at the moment is the highest grossing one. I think it's on 820 mil worldwide. I don't count Mario as a summer blockbuster.
I was going to say, do you count Mario in there at all? But no.
Not for summer. Not. Guardians is like the earliest stage of summer
Elemental
blockbuster.
hasn't done well. Flash hasn't done well.
All of them.
Film hasn't
Spider-Verse has done well. It's done 500 mil Spider-Verse.
Spider-Verse has done okay.
But this is it. At the moment, Guardians is top of the summer blockbusters. I do think it will be Mission by the time it's done and dusted.
Are you sure that Ruby Gillman, Teenage Kraken, won't be the top of the box office at the end of the summer?
I think August is going to be weird. And what I fear for this film, it's going to get... Flash got wiped out in US cinemas this week. They lost 1,600 screens, which is one of the highest ever third-week declines. As in, that's not box office. That's just like cinemas not showing it.
Yeah.
Indiana Jones' third week is Mission Impossible. Technically 2.5 weeks. So and then that's going to have its own wipeout to a point for Barbie Oppenheimer. So the next month's going to be weird. You're going to see at home, because a lot of people talk about numbers. Numbers they don't have answers for. People jumping on the bandwagon. Genuinely, we're in one of the weirdest summer blockbusters seasons ever. By the end of August, everything will be in. We'll know where it's heading at the start of August, but I think Mission, Oppenheimer, and Barbie are going to do very well throughout August as well. But unfortunately, Indiana Jones is caught in the crossfires of where it needs to be. Maybe even if this had come out at the start of May, it would have done well.
They could have put this anywhere other than summer, and it would have done well.
And this is a real shame. But then again, maybe they just wanted this film to come out. It'd been delayed so many years already. Yeah. And the last thing I'll say is, aside from box office, the Rotten Tomato side of things, we mentioned earlier, to go from 50% to 68% is very unnatural. Again, that's due to Cannes. That to the average cinema goer, that will affect them. Seeing a very lackluster reception 6 weeks ago, the film comes out 6 weeks later. Why would they bother? And the general audience is saying, you know what film is all over the news at the moment? Mission Impossible. You know who we keep seeing on the media sites doing red carpets? This new film's got Tom Cruise jumping off the side off a cliff.
Yeah.
You can't compete, and for all parties involved, it's great
something...
for cinemas. We're going to have a lot of big films out. It's great for the industry as an overall, but for these for the films individually, they're not independent films clearly. It's going to happen at Flash, Bond, this Elemental. I think the August ones are going to be awful. And I think, again, December. This should have been December. That's a really minor way to end this chat. But people are talking about these numbers. We know it's July the 4th on Tuesday. There'll be lots of Americans. It means nothing over here in the UK. It means nothing outside of America, that date for cinema-going audiences. So it will be interesting following in the coming weeks. But it's a shame because I mean, you've seen The Flash. I haven't. I don't think this film... I say films don't deserve to bomb.
This film does not deserve to bomb. The Flash absolutely deserves to bomb.
Yeah, and the problem is this is just Harrison Ford deserves better. And I think it's sort of heading into my final thoughts of the film. As I enjoyed it, I think it's a good film. It's not a classic in the sense of classic. I think it's a fitting farewell to Harrison Ford's journey as Indiana Jones. And I think at least he delivers with a lot of the other creative team. But it is just unfortunately a film that many people aren't going to see at the cinemas. And I think when this comes out on Disney Plus, this will be humongous. They waited ages to get the indie films on there to lead up to this. And then in the US, they've got the TV series. We don't have that here in the UK for some strange reason. But I think this will get second wind. A bit like West Side Story to bring Spielberg into it. Everyone's like, why didn't we see this at the cinema?
This is going to do very well on Disney Plus when it finally comes around.
It will. And I'll be picking up the Blu-ray. I'll get it in the Steelbook collection. So just please hope they match the poster designs. But aside from that, I don't have anything else on Indiana Jones. I don't know if you do.
Nope. I think all my thoughts been said. It's a fitting end to the franchise. It's not as good as some of the more previous films. I mean, it's better than Crystal Skull, but at the same time, it gives a bit of closure. There are some areas where they did well. There's some areas where I feel like they missed, but it's going to find its audience, and maybe that will be when it goes on to streaming.
Exactly that. And like I said, we want to hear from everyone at home. So thank you to those who've been commenting whilst it's been live. Thank you to everyone that's been watching it whilst it's been live. If you're watching it down the line, you're watching it a little bit later on, you've liked this video, do let us know your thoughts on the film. If this worked for you, if this film didn't work for you, anything you think we missed, do bring it up. It is interesting seeing how people have responded. I hate the audience scores. I don't believe in it as a metric because a lot of the time people can just pretend they've seen films they haven't, etc., etc., etc. But a lot of the people that like justifying them always say check the audience score, and hey, it's very high on this. It's 89%, but audience scores are always very high. That's why they don't work. So that's going to round that out. And as we said, let us know your thoughts. There won't be any more Indiana Jones videos coming up because this is the final one. But as I said, there is a playlist. If you're a fan of Steven Spielberg, you can check out the Steven Spielberg retrospective from last year. We went through all of his films, starting with Duel and ending with The Fabelmans. Covered all 4 Indiana Joneses with loads of different guests on those. So we've seen a lot of people rewatching them recently, a lot of people talking about their favorite indie films. So you can check out our thoughts over on there. Aside from that, we've been working on the Mission Impossible retrospective. We have our review releasing on Tuesday for Mission Impossible Fallout. We're joined by the Spy Hards for that one. That's a great discussion.
That was a very fun discussion.
Yeah, just over 2 hours in length. That is Tuesday, 8 p.m. If we're lucky, there'll be a supporter-free Dead Reckoning review on Wednesday. We are TBC on anything to do with that. So we mentioned there's so many big films coming out. July's a big month. There's going to be new releases. There's going to be new videos. The best thing to find out about those is getting us on social medias, Twitter and Instagram @cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy. Link to Redbubble in that description below. As you said, we'll probably update these to a link tree in the next few days and weeks. So it makes it a lot quicker for everyone to find us. And that being said, thank you all for watching. And we'll see you on the next one. Take care.